me start by very quickly saying that it's interesting. We all have forks in the road in our lives. We all have those times that really can change us. Sometimes it's thrust upon us, and sometimes we vie for it, or we want it, or we make it happen. Either way, how we deal with those changes and how we how we accept those changes, what we do with them, really affects our path forward and who we are. You all remember 9/11, where you were when you heard about 9/11. I mean, even if you weren't involved personally, it affected how we looked on the world. That was a huge event. We have personal events, the loss of a job, maybe the opposite, a promotion at work. How did you handle that? For me, one of those times is the day that I got engaged. I can tell you exactly what happened during that day, from morning through the evening when we finally called her parents when we got back to her house. It was an exciting time, but we all have times that change us. And, it's an interesting thing that those times change us, and it really brings to mind the Serenity Prayer. The prayer of, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom and the understanding to know the difference. That so embodies the journey that Laura and I are on. You have acceptance, understanding, and change. Let me take you to the beginning of our journey. It's a difficult time to say what is the exact beginning, because as with most Alzheimer's stories, there's nothing clear-cut. There's no stake in the ground. It's just all those little things that start to happen. You see, Laura, we were in our mid to late 50s, and I just noticed that things were a little askew with Laura. She was a vibrant woman. She had a built-in GPS system. She could give me directions when we were driving, even if we were in a strange town. The thing that was annoying to me was that she was almost always right. She was an interior designer. She could look at a room and see furniture placement and see textures and colors and spaces, and she could just make things happen. But now I just saw her second-guessing herself. And nothing wrong, nothing huge, just those little things. And then there were, my job required us to move around the country a good bit. And I'm not talking little moves across the city or whatever. These were literally across the country. And most people, that's a huge task, wears you down, but not Laura. She loved it. It energized her. This was a chance to redo a house, to redecorate, start from scratch. And so this catapulted her into action. She was energized by the whole thing. But not this last move. The last move, she just wasn't as organized. The woman that could teach a class in packing and organizing and unpacking and getting things set up, all of a sudden was dragging her feet. She was worn down. Again, nothing serious, just those little things. Telling stories to friends over dinner, places, dates, people even, started to get mixed up, one story jumbling in with another. It gave us pause. Nothing serious, nothing major. My job allowed me to work from home, and all of a sudden I got a little clearer insight into her plight and what was happening with her. So we went to the family doctor, and quite honestly, it was a little awkward at first. I asked to go in with her, and so I started the discussion by saying, I need to tell you what's happening with my wife. He listened. We made what I can now consider a mistake of telling him what we thought it was. We thought that it was too much stress and maybe too much multitasking, and we just completed the move, and hey, we were getting up there. We're in our late 50s now. And he agreed. He said, you're right. And he said, that has to be frustrating. Here's some pills here's an antidepressant. We went home, some pills in our pocket, and tried to muddle along as best we could. It just wasn't working. Her sleep patterns started to disintegrate. She wasn't able to sleep. She was getting crankier, more frustrated. What was going on? We couldn't figure it out. So we went back to the family doctor, And we talked all around what I consider the four horsemen of the early stages of Alzheimer's. The four horsemen are confusion and exhaustion and depression and frustration. You won't find these necessarily in a medical textbook, but I can tell you they're real. I can tell you that's life, and they all feed off one another. The part that got me was we talked all around him, and yet he did virtually nothing. He prescribed another sleeping aid to help her sleep and suggested that she go to therapy. So she could talk out her frustrations. It was so much more than that. The part that gets me now in hindsight is if we had gone in and talked about the major symptoms and said we had the 3 of the 4 major symptoms of a heart attack or stroke or even just gallstones, he would have done additional testing. Instead, we got a pocket full of pills and some therapy. Didn't really make sense. Now, to take the physician's side, it's a very difficult thing to diagnose. You can see that the 4 candles really represent the 4 horsemen. Each candle, one is exhaustion, one confusion, depression, and frustration in no particular order. They each have a distinct flame, and they each create and consumes its own energy. It's pretty amazing. The hard part is, once they're combined, if you have them all in one, you can't distinguish them apart. Can you tell which flame belongs to which candle in that picture? You really can't. They're indistinguishable from one another. Plus, they feed off of one another. So they're actually burning brighter. And the hard part also is that if you incorrectly treat, like the doctor prescribed a sleeping aid that actually enhanced some of the memory problems, it really changes the way the flames look. The flames are no longer just basic flames. They are so enhanced. So things that may treat one actually work and feed off and make the others really go out of control. Again, kind of going back to the story, we went to a psychologist, and I dropped Laura off, and to be honest with you, this is sort of the beginning of the story for us. At least this is a place I can put a stake in the ground. I'll never forget the morning. It was clear, and it was cool, and it was the spring of 2012, and Laura had been dropped off at the psychologist's office, and I was on Main Street, and I just wanted to be alone. Normally, I would find a table, get a cup of coffee, maybe talk to some people, but not that morning. I just wanted to be alone. I sat there. I can't tell you how long I sat there. I can tell you that I cried. I don't know why. I didn't really know anything. I knew that something was wrong. I knew that I would pick Laura up in a couple hours. I knew that she was safe, although a little nervous, maybe frightened. But that's all I really knew. And yet, my spirit knew more. So I returned, when the time came, I returned to the psychologist's office. And I was like a little boy walking into the principal's office. There was just something pretty foreboding about the whole thing. I wasn't sure exactly what it was. And the doctor started to go over the results of the exam. He told us what tests he gave and what they meant and what her scores were. But to be honest with you, I think I only heard one word from that whole time that he was talking. He went slowly and methodically through all the test results, and instead, I just heard dementia. It just really sucked the very breath out of us. So Laura had, at least we could put a name to what we had, and some people say that's good. We finally are able to know, and I'm not saying it's not good, but it's just a lot to digest. I mean, we had a name, but I wasn't really sure what dementia was. And what's this younger onset thing that he attached to it? Did this thing have anything to do with her confusion? Did it have anything to do with her sleeping patterns? Was she really demented? I mean, I hate that word. It's a horrible word. Did it really apply to Laura? I just found that so hard to believe. I tended to think of dementia as just memory problems, but it's so much more than that. It's cognitive impairment. It affects everything: memory, spatial recognition, coordination, speech, logical thinking, and on and on. So Laura's world was imploding, and I didn't have a clue on how to handle it or how to start. We were married for almost 30 years at that point, and our world was absolutely changing. What our roles that we were so used to, that were as comfortable as an old bathrobe, were now just different. What was particularly frustrating to me was that she looked the same. She looked great, but it was her ability that at times she could do things, and the next day things were impossible. She was still the same creative person that she had always been, and yet now she was different, at times obsessive and compulsive. I just really didn't know how to deal with it. To be honest with you, the simple thing is I didn't understand. So we pushed to learn more about dementia. After all, how could we work our way through this if we didn't even understand what we were facing? I was desperate to find a way to make it work. She seemed to be changing, but should I change, or should I be the rock in our marriage that doesn't change, the strong point? I had to figure out how to be supportive and yet allow her the independence that she needed. Was I saying or doing the right things? I don't know. She was going through her own personal hell. I was trying to help her, and yet I had my own feelings to shield as well. When we first got the diagnosis, Laura wouldn't discuss it with anyone. Not her children, not our brothers and sisters, not her father. No one. She literally was afraid of the words that they would use to label her. Crazy, eccentric, maybe even stupid. Tags that would brand her for the rest of her life, if not, at the very least, gnaw at her own self-confidence. So we muddled along and tried to cope and learn how to deal with situations as they occurred. And to be honest, the further testing revealed a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. There it is. Her own scarlet A that she would have to wear. It was just almost more than we could bear. So we knew we had younger onset Alzheimer's, or Alzheimer's that's diagnosed before the age of 65. We could barely say the words. And as an aside, you may hear it called early onset as opposed to younger onset. That terminology was really dropped because it gets confused with early stage. Everybody who has Alzheimer's goes through an early stage. Only those that are diagnosed before the age of 65 have younger onset. The biggest difference that I can tell, and I've gone through a lot of the literature, is that the younger onset symptoms generally progress at a faster rate than those that occur later in life. It doesn't really much matter. It's there, and you have to deal with it. But we had a name, but to be honest with you, we really didn't understand all the implications or what that meant. I mean, was Alzheimer's different from dementia, or was it the same, or was dementia a precursor to Alzheimer's, or was it the other way around? I honestly didn't know. And which was worse? Was it worse to have dementia, or was it worse to have Alzheimer's? So we started to dig around and found that dementia is actually just a broad term for a disease category. It's kind of like if you have a dog. You can have a dog, and it's a general term. You could have an Irish setter, you can have a border collie or a Labrador or whatever. They're all dogs. They all have similarities, but they're all distinct, and they have their own characteristics, and they have their own mannerisms. And dementia is the same way. Dementia is a broad term, like dog. What kind of dog, what kind of dementia do you have? Laura has Alzheimer's. It's a type of dementia. There's actually over 75 or 80, depending on who you read, types of dementia. Alzheimer's, again, is just one of them. There's Lewy bodies is another form Sometimes Parkinson's leads into a dementia. If you have traumatic injury to the head, you hear a lot now about concussions and things from the NFL or the NHL, all these sports teams that where there's a lot of contact to your head. You know, traumatic injury from a car accident can happen. Sexually transmitted disease, syphilis, you don't hear about it much anymore, but can also lead to dementia. I think Nero, maybe Al Capone, I'm not sure. Some of these guys are supposed to have had it. Alcoholism, and the list goes on and on. There are several different types, but they all have similarities, but they're all different. And each person is different, and it makes it difficult to diagnose. Unfortunately, the symptoms of most are irreversible. Now, what makes this really difficult, too, to diagnose is that you can have more than one at a time. It's kind of going back to the dog analogy, and if anybody knows me, they know I love dogs and compare everything to dogs. You can have a mixed breed. You can have a dog that has more than one breed in it. You can have a form of dementia that has different types of dementia. You can have Alzheimer's with Lewy bodies, or you can have frontal temporal lobe or vascular dementia, which is like strokes with Alzheimer's. You can have all these different types of dementia at the same time. The hard part is the diagnosis is all done by excluding behaviors or watching what behaviors are exhibited and what aren't there. It's really tough. You won't have a definitive answer until there's an autopsy. But what's important is that you are working with a specialist that knows, so that you can make sure that you're on the right medicines and are on the right paths for any type of therapy that you're going through. So what I'm saying is, go to a specialist. Don't let your GP treat you for this. You really need help. Somebody that specializes in dementia, whether it's a neurologist or here in North Carolina, we're blessed with a memory care clinic, which is one of the few in the United States that offers services to those that are living with dementia. But anyway, back to the story. After we received the diagnosis, Laura and I decided we needed to seek more information about this whole thing. So we went to different seminars. We picked up flyers and brochures. And I got to tell you, it was so interesting. Laura sat there stoically listening to really a bleak future that most of these seminars provided, while I squirmed and twisted in my seat. I just had a hard time listening to it, but she was as strong as ever. As the days turned into weeks, everything was changing. Everyday tasks were no longer routine. I mean, cooking, cleaning, even decorating for Christmas just no longer seemed possible. If you could have seen our house, it looked like a window on Fifth Avenue at Christmas time. I tell you what, even if it didn't move, it was decorated, and even the dogs and the cats had to suffer through Christmas time. But the truth is, it was no longer an option. She really couldn't do it. Driving, couldn't do that either. She willingly gave it up, thank goodness. It's a real battle. It wasn't necessarily about her getting lost, although she did. She got confused when she drove, and she realized it. But that wasn't the issue. As I said, somebody will always find you. I mean, it sounds a little cold, but that's the truth. But what really scared us was her ability to make split-second decisions, her ability to process information quickly in a traffic situation. Plus, her spatial configuration became off. She pulled into our garage on 2 separate occasions and hit the side of the garage door with the car. It was at the second time that she said, you know what, I can't do this. I really can't do it for everyone else's sake as well as my own. I need to give up the keys. It was a huge, huge step. I couldn't believe that she was giving up the independence that a car allows you. I mean, think about it. If your car's ever just in the shop and you don't have access to it, you feel like, what am I going to do? You feel trapped. Well, she willingly gave it up. So I made up my mind right then and there. If she could give that up, then I would make myself available to take her wherever she wanted to go, whenever she wanted to go, even if it was to my own personal hell, a fabric store. Twice in a row, 2 days in a row, even if there was a football game on that I wanted to watch. But nobody expects to handle this in their 60s. I mean, we wanted to travel. We were expecting to be able to socialize and be on the go and have dinner out. But we just found that we couldn't do it. Well, one of the outrageous things about Alzheimer's is that the decline, as they say, is slow and steady, and that's true, but it's also not true because of the capabilities and what's taken away and what's fine one day and what's okay the next. It's so hard to tell. And I try to rack my brain trying to think about it for a while, and all of a sudden I realized it's like the weather. And if I had to describe it, I would use this as an example. These are the average temperatures in the Hendersonville area from July through December. And if you notice, there's a decline. It's a little slow at first, and then it kind of picks up speed. Sort of what you would expect from Alzheimer's, a slow and steady decline. Not obviously within an 8-month period, but over a longer period, maybe over 8 years, but a steady decline nonetheless. But it's not that way. Overall, yes, but each day is certainly different. I mean, take a look at this. I actually used every 5th day to take out some of the busyness of the slide for that same period. You see, there still is a general decline. However, look at those highs. Some of them are great. Even in the far right side of the graph where there's a real decline, some of those are really good. Other times, you have some really low times too. And that's the problem. As a caregiver, how do you react to that? How do you anticipate what's going on? But that's why you can say that there's good days and good times in the bad days and bad times in the good days. It's so true. So as a caretaker and a partner, I had to be strong and I had to be supportive, but I didn't want to be smothering or restricted. She was not my child. Laura is my partner. This is a woman that has life experiences. She has likes and dislikes, and she's been really in total control up until now. So I knew that I had to change, but how? I mean, I wanted to give her the support, and I wanted to give her the independence that she needed, but was I saying or doing the right things? It was all beginning to take its toll on us. For example, I noticed that she began to wear her emotions on her sleeve. I could say just an offhand comment, and it could bring her to tears. And I certainly didn't mean it that way. Or I could say something else, it could be a perceived slight, and all of a sudden I could be facing a mama bear that was trying to protect her cubs. I mean, she was just ferocious. A normal person, we all have emotions, but a person with Alzheimer's has emotions on steroids. This was a tightrope that I was walking, and I had no experience in doing that. And yet, as tough as my job was, Laura was going through her own personal hell too. Our emotions, to be honest with you, just percolated to the surface. I mean, her frustration level increased, and so did mine. I mean, we were lashing out at each other over the simplest things. She couldn't follow the plot of the movie. I don't know why, but I found that frustrating. She repeated a question several times. I wasn't cleaning up to her standards. I don't know that I ever will, as an aside, but I was frustrated, and because she was becoming obsessive over little trivial things, and she was upset with me because I couldn't understand what was happening, and I was upset with her because she wasn't the same woman that I knew. I mean, we were angry at the doctor for not catching it earlier. So we were wasting an incredible amount of time looking for things that she had just set down or things that were hidden in plain sight. She was frustrated because she was a perfectionist, but that pursuit of perfection that made her diligent to details all of a sudden made her their slave. And she could never, ever live up to the perfection that those details were requiring of her. I mean, how long can one person sort spoons in a drawer? I mean, I found that she wanted to help, and in hindsight, she was trying to please me. She was going after my things, just trying to help me. Why did she have to go into the garage and clean off my workbench and put my tools wherever, or resort my shoes, and I'd find one in the garage and one in the closet? It didn't make sense. I was lashing out, and she wasn't holding back either. Sometimes saying the unkindest things about me, telling me how I felt. And I didn't realize what was going on, but she was fighting with herself more than me. She was painting her fears, the things that she was most afraid of, she was painting them on me, just assuming that I would feel the same. The bubbly, bright woman that was now becoming a picture of negativity. Nothing was right. And she would repeat the faults and the shortcomings of things over and over, and the smallest details were becoming mountainous obstacles. When something went missing, it became a crisis. It didn't matter what it was, how small it was, it became a crisis that had to be solved, and I had to help. And it didn't matter whether I was cutting up a chicken for dinner and I had chicken skin everywhere and all slimy and whatever. If she couldn't find the case for her glasses, I had to stop and help. And I wasn't sure whether that was right or not. You know, you hear about enabling. That's the big key word these days. Was I enabling this behavior? Was I really condoning it? But ignoring it didn't seem like an option either. And then it hit me that although the object or whatever she was looking for was insignificant to me, it was actually what it had done was it created chaos in her mind. She could no longer put it aside until the mystery of the missing whatever was solved. Stopping to help didn't reinforce bad behavior. It calmed the storm. She was reaching out to me to be a port in the storm. When I looked at it that way, it started to change how I reacted. You see, it's a matter of perspective. Leonardo da Vinci, a genius in so many ways, said perspective is to life as a rudder is to a ship and the bridle is to a horse. Think about that. How I see Laura, my perspective of her and what she's doing is so incredibly important. Do I see her as angry or do I see her as frustrated? Do I see her as incapable of completing a task or do I see her as trying as hard as she can? Do I see the completion of the task as what's really most important or is it just her involvement? It's a matter of perspective, and each care partner has to comprehend and learn how to deal with that. In the picture, is the man looking straight ahead, or do you see him in profile? It's just a matter of perspective. If nothing else, it's certainly the bit of the tightrope that we all have to walk. And if you're walking it, you better hope that you have a strong safety net under you that is really comprised of love and compassion, because when you fall, and I said when, not if, because we're all human, when you fall, you have to have that help, and understanding all of that made me more tolerant. It was sometimes I realized during all of this that I realized what was going on with us, and that we were actually in classic stages of grief. We were down a very dark and dank stairwell called grief, with landings with names like denial and depression, anger and questioning and acceptance. Yes, we were running a gauntlet that had all the feelings of love, and we had anger and frustration, and there was also grief. To be honest with you, I felt like Laura had died. Recognize that this is a very individual process, and the steps may blend and be longer for some and vary in intensity, and the order can even shift, but there is a definite pattern to grief. And although the steps may be in different order for some, they're still there. So if you or a loved one are going through this or know someone that has a diagnosis of dementia, I'm guaranteeing that they are going to go through this same process. The disease is called a long, slow goodbye for a reason. It's, as we said earlier, that's something that medical treatment can't even stop the process. The decline is slow and inevitable. And I've been in seminars where they've sugar-coated the different stages of Alzheimer's with with really pretty names like diamonds and rubies and emeralds and whatever, pearls. But the path is anything but pretty. The hard part is that unlike other diseases, you get to a point you can no longer logically discuss what's happening with your spouse or your loved one. So we sought answers, but we really didn't want to hear or accept them. We pretended that our lives were the same, and we were, to be honest with you, just in big-time denial. We silently declared that if we simply pretended that nothing was wrong, nothing would change. But Laura tried valiantly to continue with chores and life as before, but it was exhausting and depressing for her. Those four horsemen of the early stages, confusion, depression, frustration, and exhaustion, were still combining to wreak havoc in her life, each just making her spiral into darkness. Underneath the calm exterior and the facade that she wore, and that she presented to others, she was going through an emotional hell. One night, in tears, she started to cry, and I just held her tightly, and I said, "Honey, it will be okay. It will be okay." And she sobbed back, "It's not okay." She said, "I don't want what's happening. I don't want to lose my memories. I don't want to forget you." She said, "I am afraid of not remembering you or the children, my grandchildren. I'm afraid of all of this." How do you answer that? It was obvious that we were both entering a new stage of grieving. I can't tell you how or what we did to move from one stage to another, but I can only tell you that what happened to us and how we experienced them so you can understand. In the midst of the depression, I think we started to move on from the denial by telling our immediate family. First, her kids and our brothers and sisters and her dad. And that helped. It really did. It was a bit like splashing some cold water on your chest before you jump into a pool. You kind of get the feel of what's going on. It gives you a chance to test the water, so to speak. And they were all so supportive and concerned that we were ready really to tell other members of the family and very close friends as occasion permitted. And in hindsight, I realized that everyone works through their own grieving process at their own pace. And a small takeaway for me was that don't expect others, whether they're family or friends, no matter how close they are, to be at the same step or the same stage that you are. Everyone is really different. So we went back and forth to the doctors and tweaked the medicines, and eventually her depression lessened. And that was good. Her sleep started to improve, which would help the mood swings. But mixed in with all that was anger. We just were frustrated with others. We were angry, as I said, with the doctors for not treating it sooner. We were angry with each other for acting out of character. And a lot of times her anger was directed at me, which was really her own frustrations with herself. I mean, think about it. We were married for almost 30 years. We finished each other's sentences all the time. So why shouldn't she express her anger and her frustration towards me? And as we started to come to terms with this, we started the questioning and the blaming phase. If only we had caught this sooner. What if the doctor had done testing before this? What if we had eaten more organic vegetables or eaten, taken the meds sooner or drank less sugar substitutes? We didn't know. We were grasping at straws. What if? What if? And there's a natural ebb and flow back to the stages before you get to the final stage of acceptance. And to be honest with you, we came to terms with what was happening, and that's called acceptance. There was nothing we could do but help each other. We realized it, and once we started to do that, we started to help each other change. I've learned a lot about patience and understanding, not to mention more than I ever wanted to know about mascara versus eyeliner and why a woman needs so many pairs of black pants, but they do apparently. But our faith played a significant role in this as well. I mean, Jesus said, "Come to him as little children." So we did just that. Just as a child turns to his mom or dad when he or she is hurting, afraid, or in trouble, we turn to him. We didn't have the answers, but we sought God who does. And since then, I believe we've changed for the better. And Laura, by the way, through this acceptance, is no longer ashamed of the diagnosis. As a matter of fact, she'll tell virtually anyone, I have Alzheimer's, so if I repeat myself, please excuse me. She turned that scarlet letter that I talked about earlier, she turned it around into a red badge of courage. That's acceptance and that's bravery. I'm so proud of her. Well, I thought we had exited from that dingy stairwell of grief, and I can tell you it felt so refreshing. We were no longer, did we have to hide or battle with our emotions, or did we? I thought, no, I didn't think. I knew we had put it all behind us. I graduated from this school of grief, and I felt like I even had the T-shirt to prove it. But one day as I was winding our grandfather clock in our living room, I looked at the inscription on the inside plate. It simply said, Laura and Bill, August 3rd, our 5th anniversary. And it gave me pause. I forgot what that clock meant to us. Long story short, we bought the clock when we were first married, and it was special to us for a lot of different reasons, not the least of which is it was probably our first major purchase together. When it arrived, we vied for the opportunity to wind it. Actually, we were winding it every day, even though it would last for a week. Laura finally decided that I was winding it too hard, whatever that means, and so she took it over, and that was fine. And so for the next 24 years, she wound the clock. It was her job and her job alone. She never let it run down. But here we are now. The clock stopped running several times over the past few months, and at first when I noticed, I would call her attention. She'd jump up and go, oh, wow, gee, I can't believe it, and she'd slowly open it up and talk to it and apologize to it and kind of dust it as she was winding it, bring out a little special polish that she used. And as that happened again and again, I also noticed that she'd go, oh, I better do that, and then would be distracted and not be able to do it. So I just added it to what I started doing to my routine list of chores. Not that it's a big deal. It's just another example how our roles have shifted. But let me tell you how important that is. When Laura was first diagnosed, one of the first things they do is that they ask those that are being tested to draw a clock. Most people draw a circle, put the numbers on it, and then they ask you to put the time. And when the neurologist asked Laura to do it, to his amusement, she started to draw that clock. She drew not a circle, but she drew a grandfather clock. It really meant that much to her. So now I know that when she doesn't wind it, and I'm not even sure she hears it anymore, or even sees it, I knew that that meant a lot. And to be honest with you, I sat there, and instead of looking at an inscription and thinking of the young couple that had the whole world in front of them, that had all the fun and the things that we were going to accomplish together in front of us, and being able to look back on what we did, I felt alone. I felt angry. I felt sad. I realized I was back in that stairwell of grief all over again. I wasn't hitting every stage. Denial, for example, I jumped over that. I didn't deny what was happening, but I sure was angry. I was angry that we no longer got to do the things that we used to do. I was angry that so many people just didn't get it, just didn't get what we were going through. I was angry that so many of our family and friends actually were stepping back and not coming to help us. I was depressed and I felt so helpless. And that's when I recognized that I was in that stairwell, and to be honest with you, I think that's what helped pull me out of the grief process, because in the case of long-term illness such as Alzheimer's, it's not a one-time thing. But you have to brace yourself for going down it time and time again. The good news is you can emerge and you can feel good again and look in the bright side. She said, when I get stuck, it's like I'm looking at a big school of fish. But when somebody interrupts me or tries to help, it scares all the fish away. I was stunned. Now it made sense.